It's 4 p.m. on Wednesday, November 26th here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We begin once again in the U.S., where the effect of a grand jury's decision in the Michael Brown case is being seen in various parts of the country. The city of Ferguson in Missouri is the hardest hit. Governor Jay Nixon has called for more National Guard troops to secure the safety of its residents. Connie Lee has our top story.
Troops are standing guard everywhere in Ferguson, Missouri. Missouri Governor Jay Nixon has tripled the number of National Guard troops one day after the city was devastated.
Altogether, there will be more than 2,200 National Guardsmen in the region. Lives and property must be protected.
This is an attempt to avoid another shocking night like Monday, where protesters destroyed property, set cars after cars on fire, and clashed with authorities. The trouble saw more than 60 people arrested after a grand jury decided not to indict white police officer Darren Wilson for the deadly shooting of unarmed black teenager Michael Brown. President Barack Obama, speaking in Chicago, responded to Monday's violence and strongly condemned it.
Those who think that what happened in Ferguson is an excuse for violence, I do not have any sympathy for that. I have no sympathy at all for destroying your own communities.
The grand jury's decision is not only affecting the city of Ferguson. All across the U.S., demonstrators are crowding the streets once again on Tuesday. Seen here in New York City, residents are marching in protest as the effects of this fiercely disputed case continues to send shockwaves of racial tension throughout the nation. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And the officer in question, Darren Wilson, has broken his silence for the first time since his fatal shooting of Michael Brown. In an exclusive interview with America's ABC News, Wilson said he was sorry for the loss of life, but added he was simply doing his job and following his training. He said the experience has not haunted him and that his conscience is clear because he knows he did his job the right way. And in the report that we showed earlier, we could see how furious and frustrated the protesters are. Now, those who think Officer Darren Wilson should have been indicted say the grand jury proceedings for this case were sloppy and biased from the beginning. Kim Young-gil explains some of the reasons.
Controversy abounds about how the grand jury reached its decision in the police shooting case. What we know is that 12 citizens were randomly picked for the Missouri grand jury, which was made up of 9 white and 3 black members. And according to state law, 9 out of the 12 jury members would had to have voted yes to indict Officer Darren Wilson. Brown's family has been complaining about the entire process since the beginning, from a special prosecutor not being selected for this case to the secrecy of the grand jury's proceedings. Some also say what went on behind closed doors should have remained sealed even after the decision was made. They have called prosecuting attorney Robin McCullough's decision to disclose the witness transcript as unusual. Prosecutor McCullough had also faced accusations of being biased as his father, a St. Louis County policeman, was shot dead by an African-American man in 1964. Many protesters say the prosecutor was not impartial and are calling for the appointment of a new special prosecutor to replace him. The Justice Department is conducting a separate probe into the Ferguson case to look into whether civil rights violations occurred or not, which could lead to federal charges.
The department's investigations will continue to be thorough, they will continue to be independent, and they remain ongoing to rebuild understanding and to foster cooperation between law enforcement and community members.
The department will also look into the Ferguson Police Department to examine possible patterns of discrimination. Michael Brown's family is pushing for a new legislation that will require all police officers to wear body video cameras. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Now, there's optimism for the U.S. economy as it appears to be continuing on its recovery streak. The Commerce Department raised the country's third quarter GDP growth to an annualized 3.9% from the 3.5% rate reported last month. The gain was attributed to improvements in business and consumer spending. Coupled with a 4.6% surge observed in the second quarter, the fresh figures mark the strongest 6 months of growth the American economy has seen in more than a decade. And shifting to Korea now, foreign investment banks lowered the country's growth forecast for next year. Bloomberg says the market median for Korea's growth next year stood at 3.6%, nearly half a percentage point lower than the Korean government's goal of 4%. Now, the forecasts ranged from 3% to 4%. Investment bankers cite slumping domestic demand coupled with unfavorable external factors as the reasons for their relatively lowered forecasts. They expect Japan's monetary easing to weigh heavily on Korean exports next year. Yeah, people in Korea didn't feel like spending much after some 300 people died in the Seoul ferry sinking back in April. It's been over 7 months now, but consumer sentiment hasn't fully rebounded. ARIRANG's Hwang Ji-hye reports on some of the reasons.
The Korean government is trying to boost economic sentiment through a set of aggressive stimulus measures, but those efforts are not bearing fruit, not yet, at least. The Bank of Korea says the country's consumer sentiment index came in at 103 this month, down 2 points from a month earlier. The figure is even lower than the level recorded just after the Seoul ferry sinking in April, a tragedy that seriously dented private consumption. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. Despite the drop, a reading above 100 indicates that optimists still outnumber pessimists. The monthly index reflects the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. The central bank says the drop in this month's index largely stems from sluggish domestic demand and worsening global economic conditions like the weakening Japanese yen and the U.S. Federal Reserve cutting back its stimulus measures. Experts add that concerns over the slowing profitability of local exporters were also reflected in this month's Consumer Sentiment Index. Korea is heavily reliant on exports, which account for more than half of the country's total output. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And if these trends continue, experts worry that the current economy will fall into a long-term deflationary path, much like what Japan went through in the 1990s. Some are calling on the central bank to take bolder monetary policies. Kim Ji-yeon tells us more.
There's fears Korea could be taking the same deflationary path as its neighbor Japan, which experienced a 10-year economic slump. Lee Dae-jun, an economist at the Korea Development Institute, pointed to Korea's falling prices and low inflation rates as the main reasons for drawing the comparison. The country's consumer prices remain trapped in the 1% range for a full 2 years due to low demand, recording well below the government's target of 2.5 to 3.5%. It's a dismal sign as sluggish demand was attributed as the main reason for deflation. In Japan's case, in the early 1990s, dragging down the country's real estate prices and its GDP deflator, which measures the prices of all domestically produced goods. Much like Japan, Korea's GDP deflator increases are dipping low into the 0% range this year after it first started to decline in 2011. The researcher warns Seoul should be more vigilant and take preemptive measures to tackle the country's low inflation rate, such as cutting its main benchmark interest rates. He adds it's important Seoul takes into account the downward trend of real wages and expected inflation when making decisions on its monetary policies. In 1995, Tokyo lowered its policy interest rate by 0.5% to turn the economy around from recession, but the effect was short-lived as the country's real interest rate went up due to deflation. The Bank of Korea will announce a decision on December 11th on whether to further lower the current interest rate of 2%, following previous rate cuts in August and October. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
While the overall public income is rising in the nation's poverty gap keeps on widening, meaning the poor are becoming poorer. Experts say the government needs to improve its income distribution measures. Kwon So-ah reports.
The gap between the haves and have-nots in Korea is widening, while government's efforts are not efficiently improving income distributions. Korea's poverty gap last year was 36.4%, up nearly 1 percentage point from 2012 and 2 percentage points from the year before, according to Korea statistics. And the government's tax, welfare, and other policies reduced the number of households falling below the poverty line by 2.5 percentage points to 16.4% in 2013. The improvement is disappointing compared with other progress in other OECD nations. In 2011, Ireland made an improvement of nearly 32 percentage points, where less than 10% of households earn less than half of the country's median household income. Government policies also led to significant progress in narrowing income gap in France, Finland, and Germany. Experts say Korea's income redistribution policies are weakest in the OECD.
The amount of taxes collected and the welfare budget vary greatly. That's why it's crucial to decide the tax rate for higher income people and distribute it to the poor. That must be strengthened in Korea.
The analyst added that the nation has to come up with more compatible jobs for low-income people. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
In other news, Korea's biggest conglomerate, Samsung Group, is selling its stakes in 4 of its affiliates to another conglomerate, Hanwha Group. It's seen as part of Samsung's efforts to restructure the group, with Chairman Lee Gun-hee still in the hospital. Lee Ji-yoon explains.
2 of Korea's biggest conglomerates have agreed on a $1.7 billion deal. On Wednesday, Samsung Group said it will sell its controlling stakes in 4 of its affiliates to Hanwha Group. Considering Samsung hasn't sold off an entire business to a domestic rival for nearly 2 decades, the news is a big deal to many. Samsung is selling its defense businesses, Samsung Techwin and Samsung Thales, along with its chemical units, Samsung General Chemicals and Samsung Total Petrochemicals, to Hanwha. However, it is keeping Samsung Fine Chemicals and Samsung BP Chemicals. These are the ones that make materials for rechargeable batteries and liquid crystal display. With this deal, Samsung Group is looking to pull out from its defense and chemical businesses. Instead, it's going to focus more on its core businesses to bring in more profits. They include electronics, financial services, engineering, and construction. Experts say Samsung is taking aggressive steps toward restructuring, doing away with affiliates that don't improve the group's competitiveness. They add the company also seems to be getting ready to transfer the group's ownership to the next generation of the family, considering its head Lee Gun-hee remains in hospital after suffering a heart attack in May. With the purchase, Hanwha Group will jump up the ladder to become Korea's 9th largest conglomerate. Lee Ji-yoon, ARIRANG News.
Korean companies looking to cut costs on labor and seek tax benefits overseas are looking to Vietnam. Citing government data, Vietnamese media outlets are reporting that foreign direct investment comes to more than $17 billion so far this year, and that Korean firms account for 40% of that amount, or nearly $7 billion. That is the highest among the 60 foreign countries that invested in Vietnam, followed by Singapore and Japan. The reports attribute the influx of Korean investments to corporate tax benefits provided by the local and central governments, as well as cheaper labor compared to its main rival, China.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Korea has finalized the details of a team that will be sent to Ebola-hit Sierra Leone next month. Seoul's foreign ministry says it will deploy a team of 10 that includes 4 doctors and 6 nurses. They are scheduled to depart on December 13th and first head to a British Ebola treatment facility near London for training. Their medical work in Sierra Leone will start on December 29th and will last for around 3 months. Korea dispatched a separate team to the country earlier this month, primarily to conduct site inspections of medical facilities there. And shifting to Hong Kong, where riot police detained 80 protesters following clashes that offered a very different picture from last week's clearance of a part of the Admiralty protest site, where student protesters had even pitched in to help remove tents and fences. Several thousand demonstrators took backstreet barricades in the Mongkok area on Tuesday after police had partially cleared it hours earlier. Many demonstrators said they remained defiant in their fight for fully free elections in Hong Kong's 2017 chief executive polls. Police clearances of protest sites are expected to continue as a local media report say a separate court order was granted to clear out an even larger part of Mongkok on this Wednesday. Now, earlier this year, roughly 80 South Koreans were reunited with their North Korean family members after being separated for more than 60 years. But those yearning for a chance to meet with their long-lost loved ones aren't just here on the Korean peninsula. A new documentary shines a light on them and their suffering as well. Our Im Yoon-hee reports.
Decades after their separation, these sisters are still unable to hold back their tears as they sing a tribute to their long-lost brother they were forced to leave behind in North Korea. Their story is similar to an estimated 100,000 other first-generation Korean Americans who were separated from their families as a result of the Korean War. Because the U.S. has no political ties with North Korea, contact has been impossible, leaving families wondering if their lost members are even still alive. Now in their 70s and 80s, most are left wondering if they'll ever get an answer at all. For the past 5 years, a team of Korean Americans have worked together to produce a documentary aimed at bringing awareness to this issue, as well as rallying support for a reunion between these families. Through interviews and meetings, second-generation Korean Americans Jason An and Eugene Chung uncover the heartbreak and burden these family members have endured, now grandmothers and grandfathers, who are still hoping that someday they'll be able to see the faces of their beloved family members once again. The documentary is 50 minutes long, but goes in depth with 3 of the 100,000 who were separated on the Korean peninsula, shedding light on the pain of a divided family. This film has been screened at various locations around the U.S., including the U.S. Congress, Harvard University, and at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies in Seoul. With each screening, the team hopes to bring House Concurrent Resolution 91 into effect, which will potentially open opportunities for separated family members to be reunited. Im Yoon-hee, ARIRANG News.
And shifting gears to some tech news, technology doesn't just make our lives more convenient, it can mean life-altering changes for those living with disabilities. Our Son Jung-in shows us one of the latest examples.
Shin Hyung-jin has suffered from a rare disease since birth that has weakened his muscles and leaves him unable to move. The graduate student in computer science at Yonsei University in Seoul relies mainly on his sight to interact with the world. Now, thanks to a new eye mouse developed by Samsung Electronics, Shin can now interact more easily with his computer. This is a second-generation eye-tracking mouse dubbed the iCan Plus that comes with better calibration sensitivity and an overall improvement in user experience. Users can move the mouse cursor on the screen with their eyes and click by blinking or staring at a specific link for a moment.
We developed this device in hopes that people with disabilities can easily communicate with the world.
Samsung says it plans to donate units of the new eye mouse to charities and will open and share related technologies to promote further development of the sector. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
And now on to a piece of information not everyone is perhaps aware of. Korean is apparently the 13th most spoken language in the world, ahead of even French, and interest in learning the language is growing. ARIRAN's Shin Se-min talks about some of the efforts being made to nurture that very interest.
He wasn't driven by K-pop. Ethiopian student Bizayo Bekata came to Korea to study medicine, inspired by Korean doctors who were treating the sick back in his home country. But before he could even begin his desired field of study, Bekata first had to learn the language it was being taught in.
아직까지 어려운 건 쓰기예요. 예, 한국 쓰기. 계속 예를 들면 전화 쓰면 못 따라듣는 거 있으면은 다시 플레이하고 그런 식으로 했어요.
More than 86,000 foreigners were receiving paychecks in Korea as of last year. To attract more, the government has rolled out a plan to issue more work visas.
중요하죠. 지금 터키에서 예전에는 한국어에 대한 인식이 높지는 않았는데 요즘 한류 덕분이기도 하고 한국 기업들 때문이기도 한데 이렇게 한국과 졸업생들은 대부분 다 취직이 되고요. 이스탄불이나 큰 도시에 터키 큰 도시에 있는 한국 기업들에 취직이 되고.
The Cyber University of Korea is facilitating efforts by offering free online language courses in 5 languages. The founder of the program says he plans to personalize teaching materials for foreigners working in different fields.
With the lessons that are provided, foreigners will have no trouble handling casual, everyday conversations. But I think providing them with the skills to understand language specific to their field will help bring more foreign workers to Korea.
Language is no longer just a form of communication, but also a medium that opens doors to a country's culture. The learning and teaching of the Korean language could also soon become the driving force behind the growth of the Korean economy. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Good afternoon. We're nearly in the end of November, but we are still enjoying this fall-like weather here in Korea. I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. We began with a cloudy morning, but things are clearing up due to the high pressure front coming from China. Along with that, we can expect higher daytime temperatures in the mid-teens for some regions too. Now, these temperatures are relatively high, and looking at the graph, it's a lot warmer compared to the average year, so enjoy it while you can, because rain is expected all throughout the week in different places, and in fact, a nationwide rain is in forecast on Friday and Sunday, which will push down the morning lows below the freezing point in some areas, including here in Seoul. And to our readings for today, Seoul will peak at 15 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will reach up to 15 also, and 16 degrees. And to other regions, Jeju-Gwanan peaks to 15 as well, while Dokdo and Mangkeungang will be hitting a bit lower at 11 degrees. Well, that's all for Korea. Now here's a look at the weather conditions around the world. And that's all we have for you at this hour. Thank you for watching. More news coming up at 6 p.m. Korea time.